Good morning. This is Pam Batchelor here at NCDPI, Digital Teaching and Learning Team, and I am here to talk to you today about some reporting basics in Schoolnet. With me, I have my colleague Jill Darrow.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jill Darrow with Digital Teaching and Learning. I am the Southeast consultant, and I also support the Digital Learning Initiative Professional Development. Great to have you on today.
So we are expecting about 100 folks, so we're going to give everyone just a minute to get on the webinar. First, we're going to ask a couple of questions. This webinar is recorded, so it will be posted, and we will send out a link via email probably on Friday of this week. So let's get started with, first of all, can you hear me talking? All right, I'm going to close that poll. Go back to my screen. There we go. All right, and then can you hear my, or can you see my screen? All right, thank you for that. So I'm going to, now that we've established that you can see the screen and that you can hear me, we're going to go over a couple other features on the webinar. There is a questions box. If at any point in time you have a question, please use that question feature to type in your question. That keeps track of who asked questions, so that way in case you ask something that we need to come back and follow up with you on a little later, we can do that. So please use that question box to type in any questions throughout the webinar. I will pause and we will answer questions as they come in. You'll also notice that there is a handouts box, and in that handouts is a PDF copy of the presentation for today. If you'd like to join me for the live links, if you'll type in that bit.ly, and I believe Jill has already been gracious enough to put that in the chat box. So you will need the bit.ly for the links that I'm sharing. So just looking at my screen, when you share a screen and go to webinar, the links are not active on the share screen. So you actually have to have a copy of the presentation up in another browser or tab. So that way you can actually click on the links as I go through them during the webinar. So I'll pause for just a second, see if there's any questions that have come in. And if not, we're just going to go on. So our topics for today, we're going to talk a little bit about the homepage, which is where kind of our launching point for reporting in Schoolnet. We're going to go through the pre-formatted reports in Schoolnet. These are the reports that Schoolnet generates after your students have taken an assessment in Schoolnet. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the reporting dashboard and prior year data, and then comparison reports if we have time. So this webinar is meant as an introduction to the reporting available in Schoolnet. We do have another webinar coming up later in the year where we're going to dig into data in Schoolnet, and that'll be a little bit more advanced. But for the most part today, we're going to be talking about those pre-formatted reports in Schoolnet and all the data analysis that you get instantly when you give an assessment in Schoolnet. So a couple of CEU questions before we dive into the content of the webinar. For your live participation in the webinar today, you'll receive 0.1 CEU. You'll receive a certificate with your 1 hour of credit. For participating in the live webinar, GoToWebinar keeps a track of who is logged in and signed into the webinar and how long you are signed in for. So we use that list as a way of providing credit for folks who were here and participating in the live webinar. So if you are in a room with several people, make sure that each person is signed into the webinar in order to receive credit. We cannot give credit for someone who said that they were watching with somebody else. This is a process that can be audited by the state, and so we need to have a valid record for who attends the live webinars. The type of credit is approved by your school or district district's local process. On the certificate, it does recommend digital learning competency credit. However, that justification and approval is given by your local school or district, so you'll need to follow your local process, as well as maybe including a written justification or any artifacts of how this webinar content is affecting your instruction. Maybe if you're grouping some students after seeing some of the reports today, that would be an excellent artifact to include. And then finally, we are offering this webinar at several times, at 4 p.m. today and then next Wednesday at 7 p.m. And so you can only receive credit for one webinar on the same topic. All right, so I shared this number in our last webinars last month, if any of you were up here, but basically we had over 14 million assessments submitted in Schoolnet, right? So that's a lot of data. If you think about each and every assessment and how much data Schoolnet's able to pull from one assessment. So that brings me up to my next question. I'm curious, how many of you have given a test in Schoolnet? So give you about 10 more seconds to vote on that poll. And I'm going to share the results. So it looks like about 40% have given a test in the last 6 months and 30% have given a test more than 6 months ago. So that's great that 70% of you have given a test in Schoolnet, so you know kind of the data that I'm talking about. And then for those of you who've never given a test in Schoolnet, you're just going to want to make sure you pay close attention to some of the steps coming up, because you're going to have to kind of pretend that you've given a test in order to launch into these reports. So on your Schoolnet homepage, you do have data that's presented right on your homepage. If you scroll down just a little bit after you've logged into Schoolnet from the NC Ed Cloud, you will see an area of your dashboard that kind of looks like this, where you'll have your sections and then you'll have different tabs for the different levels of assessments, right? So whether it's a district or local test, a classroom test, standardized tests, and you'll be able to see kind of a score group comparison. You'll notice that there's a box on the left side, or right side, excuse me, that has all of your reports under it. And we're going to spend some time digging through what each one of those reports means. But I did want to point out that this is right here on your homepage. So you don't have to go into the reporting dashboard, which is on the left side of the navigation in Schoolnet. You can actually just start your data analysis right from your homepage. And then, of course, if you scroll down, you'll see your students, and you can click on the student's name, which is in blue, to launch their profile, which includes some data analysis that's specific for that student, right? So we're going to now dig in. And so I'm going to be using the training site. So based on our survey results, the poll that I just asked, if you have not given a Schoolnet assessment, or it's been a while since you've given a Schoolnet assessment, I encourage you to use the training site, which the training site link to log in is this bit.ly right here. And then the login we're going to use for today is teacher 3401, and then the password is home base. And I'm sure Jill is going to be copying that over into chat right now. But if you have given an assessment in Schoolnet recently, this school year in particular, I would like you to actually log in to your live site. So going into the NC Ed Cloud, clicking on the Schoolnet icon, and then finding that dashboard that we just showed previously on the homepage. So if you are going to look at your own live data, which I think is more powerful, then on your screen, you're going to go to the home page and scroll down just a little bit until you see kind of the data dashboard right there on your home page.
As
All right.
Pam said, if you need access to the training site, I've put a link in the chat. You can click on that hyperlink It'll take you out and then you can put in the username and password, and I'll leave that in the chat for you.
All right, so I am on the training site now. So you'll see it says welcome back teacher. And then like I said earlier, if you just scroll down, you'll see what we call this classroom assessment monitor area, which is your data dashboard, right? And so I see, just as that screenshot showed, I see kind of an overall summary. For this particular test, it was a district level test. So I see the performance of the district, the performance of the entire school, and then the performance of my section that I have selected, right? So I kind of have those comparisons right there. I'm going to spend the next chunk of time going over these reports on the left side. So I'm just going to click on the first one, which is test summary. All right, so this page is loaded. This is the test summary. It basically breaks down our scores into score groups, right? So we can see how many students were in each score group. 20% of students were proficient on this particular test. I can scroll down and see my students, see the average score. So I can compare this performance by student, by subgroup. So if I wanted to see, in particular, what my female students were versus my male students, and then also by standard, right? So I can see the standards on the test and what the average score was. Notice that in Schoolnet, there's something called a golden M that we call, and that is the related instructional materials. So anywhere you see this M symbol, you can click on it and it will actually search in Schoolnet for related instructional materials that are aligned to that standard. So if in particular, this standard right here, only 30% was my average score, I could click on that golden M, and that would pull up some more instructional materials or activities, lesson plans that maybe I could use to reteach that standard to my students. How are we doing with questions so far, Jill?
So far, we don't have any questions.
Okay, well, awesome. Then I'm assuming everyone's keeping up with us. So all of the reports in Schoolnet, you can export them. Some of them you can export as a PDF and as an Excel spreadsheet, and some of them you can only export as a PDF. So for this test summary, I have the option to export it to a PDF, but on some of the other ones I'll point out, you can actually export them into Excel. So if you wanted to do some advanced formulas, or graphics, you could do those as well. So the next one we're going to talk about is the standards analysis report. I'm just going to use these tabs across the top of the screen to open up the different reports. So standards analysis is pretty self-explanatory. We're talking about performance based on standard. So we can see all the standards that were in this assessment. And then if I hover over any one, I will see the number of aligned items and the average score, as well as the text of that particular standard or objective, right? And then if I go down, I will start to see some more specific data based on averages, right? So I can see the standard, how many questions were on that particular assessment. So I see a 1, that means I only had one question on this assessment that was aligned to the standard. And I can see the district's average score, my school's average score, and then my section average score. And then beneath that are my individual students, right? So keep in mind that this is going to change based on the type of test you have. If you've just given a classroom assessment, you're just going to see your total class score. You're not going to see the school or the district. If this is a school level test, then you will see your class, the school, but you will not see the district. And then of course, if it is a district assessment, you would see all 3 levels.
Pam, if you will pause and
Mm-hmm.
repeat steps to get to that report, if you could show them, there's been a
Yep.
question on how to get there.
So I'm just following across the top of the test. After I went to test summary, the next tab was standards analysis, and I've just simply clicked on the standards analysis tab and then scrolled down to where there's more detailed information available. So I can continue to scroll, and here, this is one of the reports I was talking about where you could actually export to Excel. One common use of exporting a report to Excel is perhaps you gave a classroom assessment, and then one of your PLC members also gave the same assessment, and you wanted to kind of compare your performance apples to apples. An easy way would be for one of you to start an Excel spreadsheet by exporting your results, and then the other teacher can copy and paste their results into the same spreadsheet. That way you can kind of compare apples to apples with classroom level tests if you didn't make a school level assessment. If you made a school level assessment, then you would actually your administrator or instructional coach would be able to see and compare the data from the different sections. So the next report is item analysis. So I'm just going to go back up to the top of the screen and go to the next tab, which is for item analysis. And I'm going to refresh my screen because it looks like it didn't load quite. So I'm going to go item analysis. And item analysis does take the longest amount of time to load, so it's not unusual for the screen to take a minute or two to load, because it is a more detailed report where it's pulling item by item. So it's going to have like a item percentage for each question, as long as like the most frequently missed question answer choices. So it does take just a second to generate, and we are in the training site, which doesn't have as many resources. So you can see it's loaded now. In your local site, it would probably load a little faster. So the item analysis is probably something that we're most familiar with looking at the different items. You have your section-wide percent correct. Notice the items are blue, which means they're links. And so if I clicked on it, it would actually bring up the item. One thing that you can do is actually go through your item analysis question by question, and it kind of brings up a nice screen image. So teachers can often actually use the item analysis report when going through item by item as kind of like a class review to go over the different items. We'll see if it'll take a second to load that for me. Are there any questions?
So far, so good.
All right, great. Well, we're continuing just to let this load for just a second. And I will point out that if you scroll down, you'll actually see your students' performance. And if you'll notice on this particular assessment, there's a time. So this is how long a student took to answer each item on the test. So this is a feature that you can enable when you schedule a test, and that is to capture student response times. That way you have kind of a question by question how long each student took. It's very helpful for students who may have some test anxiety, or you're looking at to see how did they read the passage. If they only took a few seconds to answer the question, and maybe they didn't read the passage that was associated with it. So just a lot of good information to capture there with that student response times. So here's that screen that I was talking about with the item analysis, where you can actually look at the question and the answer choices. So you could certainly look at this and kind of go over it with your class, because it doesn't have any specific student data right here, right? So you can see the answer choice, the most common error, and then you'll see that since this is a district level test, you'll see that versus your class, your school, and then your district, right? And then the standards that's aligned to it. And again, notice the little M. So I'm just going to go back to the item analysis, but see also on the top right side, you can say next item. So you could actually go through the whole item analysis with your class, kind of on a question by question basis here to review and go over the material. So I'm going to click to go back to the item analysis, and hopefully it won't take quite as long to load. There we go. So we have our point values, the correct answers. Notice there's a checkbox next to student's name. So let's say I want these 3 students, maybe they need some more review on conflict since they all missed the first question. I can click on those 3 students, and then down here at the bottom it says add to group, and I can say new group and enter their group name. So groups on Schoolnet are strictly for the teacher. So it's a way for you to organize students. Maybe they need conflict review. All right, and so I can save, and then now these 3 students are in the group that I've named conflict review. Another option from the item analysis is to highlight your low performing students. So that way, I can see quickly the students that are not quite near mastery yet. Um, if you happen to have a test such as this one, where there's a lot of students that are not near proficiency, it may not be as helpful to highlight those low performing students, but that box is there and that is a helpful option. Any questions about item analysis before we move on? All right, so the next one is going to be going over standards mastery. This is actually my favorite report in Schoolnet. I think this report saves a lot of time with teachers. So these next 2 reports I'm going to go over, standards mastery and trends, are cumulative reports. So it doesn't matter how many assessments you give in Schoolnet, these reports will continue to build with the results from all of those previous assessments. So the value of these 2 reports really depends on how frequently you use Schoolnet. If you only use Schoolnet to give 1 or 2 tests, then this report's not going to be particularly valuable. But if you make Schoolnet part of your regular instructional routine, then these reports are going to be very powerful, especially as we get towards the end of the semester or the end of the year. And that's because they'll continue to build. So you'll see my standards, how many items aligned to that standard I've assessed my students. And then these numbers in blue are actual links to the groups of the students. So Schoolnet will group my students in this section based on their current standards mastery, right? And so it'll tell me how many times I've assessed that particular standard, right? So obviously, when you only have one test item on a standard, that's not going to be a strong correlation to their performance. But as you start to build more and more assessments in Schoolnet, and you get to where you have 5 items, 10 items aligned to a standard, that's going to give you a very clear indication of where the student is in mastery and then grouping the student. So I'm just going to click on this 10, and just to give you an example, so for this particular standard, I have 10 students that have indicated, mastery of it, and then I have 10 students who don't. I have any idea about what I'm talking about. Now, for this example, remember I only had 1 question on this standard, so I can't really use this as a clear grouping, but as this report grows throughout the year, my groups will be formed for me using Schoolnet. So this is great for if you have any type of remediation time built into your day, or if you have it like once a week and you can pull a student group, come into Schoolnet and look at the standards mastery report and look at your groupings. How do you guys think you could use this report? If you just want to type in the question, if you think you would use the standards mastery, how you would use it. If anyone does use it, I would love to hear how you currently use it. So I'll give you just a second. And yes, Valerie, the standards mastery is a cumulative mastery report for all the assessments given for a class in Schoolnet, right? So it doesn't count anything else. So it doesn't count any standardized testing. If your district uses MAP or anything else, it doesn't pull in any extra data outside of just Schoolnet assessments. But it is cumulative for Schoolnet assessments. So if you use Schoolnet consistently, it would be a consistent report. All right, that's a great question. So Keep them coming. All right, any other thoughts on standards mastery? Again, for each standard, notice you have that golden M where you can pull instructional materials that are aligned to that particular standard. And then as well as it looks almost like a little calculator. But what that is actually your calendar. So you can plan to add different standards to your lesson planner that's built in within Schoolnet. All right, so the next pre-formatted report that we're going to go over is trends. So trends is kind of this buildable report where you can compare student performance and proficiency on multiple tests, right? So let's say I have, in this example, I have 2 tests. I can click on the different tests and say go, and then it's going to tell me that on this first test, only 20% of my students were proficient, and then on this other test I gave, 55% were proficient. And then I can, from this screen, go into the item analysis or the test detail for either one of those tests. So trends was a way of comparing proficiency. I do think the comparison reports that I'll show in just a minute are more powerful now. So trends this report's been available for about 2 years now, but comparison reports just came out in January. So I think now that comparison reports is here, trends isn't quite as needed, but some people still do like this quick, simple looking for proficiency, and then you can export the results out. All right. So I'm going to click on the little red house icon in the top left corner of my screen just to go back to my home page because we've gone through and we've looked over all of these pre-formatted reports. So every time you give an assessment in Schoolnet and either you have scanned or uploaded student scores or they've completed the test online, you will have all of these reports available to you for you to look in and see how your students are doing and plan instruction based on where their current performance is. You will notice too that just on the dashboard you have an overall performance, but then you also have a performance by standard. So if I just wanted to do a quick check to see how my students are doing on this particular standard, I can go ahead and generate just a quick check report right there on how they're doing based on that standard. And then if I wanted more details, I could click on that standards performance details. All of this is just right here from the home page. So Schoolnet does a great job of keeping your data right there in front of you on your home page under that classroom assessment monitor. So another place that you can also get to all of this data is from your reporting dashboard, which is kind of indicated on the left side under the blue navigation under reporting, and then you'll see a reporting dashboard. It kind of looks like a speedometer icon. So if I click on that, here's another way I can access all of the reports in all of the tests I've given in Schoolnet. Now, if you'll notice right here, it looks like I've got 2 assessments, but maybe I want to look at the things I've done last year. So maybe I want to compare test results from last year to this year. Over here on the right side where it says current enrollment, I can click on that and I can actually go back into previous school years, right? So one of the things that we get a lot at the beginning of the year is people from Schoolnet saying, where did all my data go? Where did everything go from previous years? It doesn't get lost. It just, Schoolnet does a good job of cleaning itself up for you for the next year, so that way you have new students and it cleans itself up, but all that data is still there and available to you. You just have to come under the reporting dashboard and choose a previous year, right? So I'm gonna let that load for a second, and then I can see all of the assessments that I gave last year, right? And so one of the neat things is the comparison report, which is what I talked about earlier. It's very simply, it allows you to compare student performance on up to 10 reports. So you'll see there's a checkbox next to an assessment. And once I've checked one assessment, you'll notice now I have this compare assessment screen. And so I can go in here and maybe I want to compare this one, and this one, right? So I've got 4 assessments selected. All right, and then if I click on the blue compare assessments, it's going to give me some options about which fields I want to include. So maybe I'm just interested in raw an average score, right? So I'm just going to have average score checked. And I can choose whether I want student name to be shown or not, but maybe for this example, I don't. Maybe I just want to know overall trends. You can choose additional data elements to display in your report. So maybe I'm interested in gender, and maybe I'm interested in race, EL for our English learners, gifted. Now, I will tell you that AIG and English learners is both a program and a data element, and there's different information contained in both places. So your EL is and gifted up here in this data elements is pretty much just telling me if they are English learners or if they are gifted. Our additional program information would tell me more about that. So example for AIG, it would tell me if the student is, for reading, math, or, intellectually gifted or both. It would let me know that additional information. So I always choose both. So that way I have the most information. You can also include absences, because sometimes that plays a big role in the student performance. So I'm going to generate this report. Let's see. I'm going to try to generate the report. There we go. Okay, so I either have to show student name or ID. So there we go. That was why. All right, so now I have my 4 tests as kind of this bar graph here, and I can see how my students performed. And then you'll see here, instead of student name, I'm just seeing their numbers. I can see how many absences. Maybe I'm just interested in my females. So now it's, just showing me data about my female students. Maybe I want to also filter by gifted. All right, so now I'm just looking at my gifted female students, right? So you can see how you can filter down to a very small number of students. And then if I keep scrolling over, I would see their results if it appears they took the test. So I'm just going to say gifted. All right. And here's a little key thing here. Additional data elements only reflect current enrollment data. So since I selected last year's test, none of these students are going to have taken last year's tests because they are filtered by, so I'm going to clear all my filters so that way I get my data. So I can see who has taken this test. So you can go back and let's say I wanted to add some assessments. So maybe if I wanted to take assessments for this year, so I can say current enrollment. All right, and I'm going to choose these. And now I have 6, right? So now I have more data, right? About what all of these students have taken. And it's kind of going to group them up for me. You can see what my students were, how many EL students I had last year, this year, um, and you can filter down. And the nice thing is that this is also one of those ones that you can export. So if I wanted to just show what I've currently filtered, I can say export visible data to Excel. And that's just going to give me an Excel spreadsheet with what I've currently filtered. If I'm interested in all data, then I would do the student data to CSV, right? So Schoolnet makes it really simple for you to go out. And in fact, you can actually save this report. So let's say I'm an instructional coach, or, and I've filtered down and compared these assessments. I can actually go and save this report. All right, so that was a lot. Questions about the comparison report, ideas, ways you think you could use it?
So far, Pam, we don't have any questions.
All right, awesome. I'm hoping they're coming in.
We still don't have any questions. So
All right. So also under, if I wanted to go back to my dashboard, I can go back. And I can see that reporting dashboard. I can also see any reports that I've saved. So if I'd saved that custom report. So I do have a few things back on my slideshow. So I did make a couple of slides just for you to refer back to, kind of telling you about what each report is. So that way when you are ready to look at reporting, after you've given a test in Schoolnet, you can go back and say, oh, which report was it that gave me the standards mastery groupings or the trends, and then also that tip about viewing prior year data. So that way, if someone comes up to you and says, oh, I don't know where all my data went in Schoolnet, you can reassure them that it's right there. It just cleaned itself up into a prior year. And so you can go to it under the reporting dashboard. For comparison reports, I did link a quick reference card, which kind of walks you through those steps of creating that comparison report, because I know until you've done it a few times, it can be a little tricky. So, and remember, you can select up to 10 assessments for comparison reports. And you can have different types. So if you wanted to compare a district benchmark or a school level test to a classroom assessment, you can do that with that compare assessment report. And then there's also a quick video. So if you are more inclined to watching a video about how to create a comparison report, you can do that as well. Do we have a question pop in?
yes, we have one question that came in, and it is, if a teacher notices a student needs to retake an assessment based on the data, can they reassign a quick assessment just for that student?
So the easiest thing would probably, it depends on how they want the report. So if they want a grade, if they want the initial grade and a retake grade, then yes, they would need to go into that assessment, make a copy of it, and then just assign it to that one student. If they just want the final grade, when they go in to score assessment, they can just delete the student score for that one student, or that, if there was a handful, and then they can retake the test using the same test passcode. So it just depends on if they want the original score and the retake to show, or if they just want the final score to show, which way you would do that. All right, I do have quite a few resources on this slide for you. We have our webinar schedule with all of our future upcoming webinars. There's a Schoolnet YouTube channel, which has some quick instructional videos, less than 5 minutes, about how to do different things in Schoolnet. And then there's also, since we're talking about reports today, I put a link to this Schoolnet report library, which is a really awesome document that goes into detail about every type of report and custom reporting that's available in Schoolnet. So in the future one, I think it's either in January or February, we're going to dig more into Schoolnet data and we'll talk a little bit more about custom reporting. But I just wanted to show you this report library. It's really awesome. You can look at just the table of contents and kind of see what you want to look at and then go to that page. It's very extensive. You can see it's like 73 pages long and pretty much tells you how to create any kind of a report that you want or any kind of set of data from Schoolnet.
Pam,
Mm-hmm.
we have a question that's come in. Valerie is a math coach and she wants to see a report for all teachers. How could she see that information?
So it just depends um, on her access level, which is granted in PowerSchool. So you would probably most likely need to talk to your data manager at your school. So right now, I'm logged in as a teacher, right? And so I just see my courses. If you were logged in to your site, Valerie, if you had a drop down right here that had teachers, then that means you already have the correct access. And so then the question becomes, how did they create a test? So if a teacher was just giving my classroom assessments, then you would kind of need to go into each teacher, each of your math teachers, and see what their assessments are. Or you could build a custom report, which is in that report library, that would pull their classroom details. That's why I encourage the school level tests, because school level tests already kind of aggregate the data into the different sections by teacher. So as a math coach, I'm sure you could help influence creating some school level tests for the future, so that way you'll have your data nicely separated and aggregated for you. So for Michelle's question, you will receive an email with a copy of the presentation as well as a link to the webinar with your CEU certificate, probably on Friday of this week. And so you will be able to share that link to the webinar as well as the presentation with any of your other colleagues that might be interested. All right, so Christy, a school level test is actually called a school assessment. It's not a shared assessment. A shared assessment is for if teachers want to share an assessment together, but that's still considered a classroom test. And so it won't aggregate the data for you. You have to create a school level test or a district benchmark, depending on your rights and priorities. So, and again, so we have on our links, we have, thank you, Michelle, for bringing this up. We have a Schoolnet Google site. And on that Schoolnet Google site, you will find a webinar archive that has all of our webinars. So I have the one from August already up here, and I will be adding this one later this week. So if you wanted to share all of the webinars for teachers, you can do so on our Schoolnet Google site. Yep, Michelle, you are correct. This is the second webinar of the year. So the first one's already live on our webinar archive. All right, so if there's any other questions, please go ahead and type those in. Otherwise, I'll leave you with my contact information. This is my email address as well as my Twitter. If you are on Twitter, please follow me at Pam Batchelor. I try to tweet out stuff about Schoolnet and Canvas as well as just good free stuff in general. And I hope you guys have an awesome day. So yes, Michelle, the Schoolnet Google site will have all of the prior webinars. So make sure you just give them the link to that Schoolnet Google site. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you so much, Jill, for joining us and helping with the chat today. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful day and enjoy some of this fall weather that we get to experience this week.